All right, so I'm going to call the meeting to order at 7:03 p.m. And so first off, I just want to state what we said for the record, that this meeting is being recorded. So your continued participation in this meeting is consent to recording. I thank Member Mitchell for volunteering to take this evening's minutes, and thank all who are our guests here tonight. Hello, Malaya. We're just one that just made the we're recording announcement. So the first item on the agenda is the election of vice chair. So I will take nominations for a vice chair.
I'll nominate Malaya.
All right, so there's a nomination for Member Gustafson. Is there a second of that nomination?
I guess that leaves me. I'll second it.
All right, Member Sullivan will second it. Are there other nominations for vice chair? All right, seeing none, we'll close the floor to nominations and go to a roll call vote. So Member Gustafson? Larry, you're on mute.
Yeah, I took advantage of her not being able to use the mute.
Oh, there you go.
I said I abstain.
Sorry, okay, Member Gustafson abstains. Member Mitchell?
I guess, is it a vote of yes that we're looking for?
Is a vote of I don't know what Member Gustafson is looking for. You can vote yes or no if you want.
Yeah.
Yes. Member Sullivan?
Yes.
And Mills, yes. So that passes. So congratulations, Member Gustafson. Now I'm going to go and leave, and you can now and run that. All right. So so the next item on the agenda is about fiscal year 20 E&D certification, but I want to turn to Mr. Dede and see. I know there was a comment about possibly taking some items out of order. Ms. Barton is here with us this evening and doesn't necessarily need to be here all of this evening. So unless there's objections from members of the committee, and Dan, is it still your intent to take that issue out of order?
Yes, it is, please, if we may. Okay. Please, thank you. Thank you. Alrighty, so I'm just going to scroll down here to the section on revolving funds in school lunch. And I'd like to welcome Margaret again to our meeting this evening. Give me one more second. Alrighty. So you have in front of you, and hopefully just a site check, if you will. Just want to make sure you can all see this report here.
We can. And what page of the report are you on, just in case people want to follow along?
I am on page 29 of 44, 29 of 44. All right, this is and good evening, folks. Welcome, Member Sullivan, and I look forward to working with you and happy to answer any questions as you go forward on this committee. This is a munis budget report. Ran this report yesterday, and the original appropriation, again, that's the carry forward balance, so the $28,054 from FY20 into 21. And again, just looking at this real quickly, and this is something that, Margaret and I talked about very briefly. It's something that I've had conversation with my DOI rep is as you can see, at the end of the day, there are a number of accounts that last year ended up in deficit, and there's really two buildings, the high school and Mount View, that kind of carry the load for the balance of the district. And I think last year is probably, well, it is a deviation clearly from past years, but I think if you look at past years, you'll see kind of the same trend in terms of the end balances for fiscal years. So something to look at. I did speak to my DOI rep when we were doing the E&D certification, and we would certainly do an analysis of that to see if there's any places that we can make any adjustments. Maybe not, but going forward. But bringing us forward to FY21, and the reason for Margaret being here this evening is that we would like to again look at where we will potentially land this year. Some good news, and Margaret will get into the detail momentarily, but if you recall from our previous discussions, we were projecting a deficit of about 464,000 and change. That projection has been amended, obviously, and right now we're looking at a shortfall of approximately 112,407. Again, that's a projection. Margaret and I look at this religiously, especially in terms of the payroll cost. She does have some vacancies that she'll have to backfill if we go forward come April with getting K through 5 in, and she'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. My game plan moving forward with the shortfall, again, we'll talk about this a little bit later when we get into the FY21 expense budget, is to make adjustments between school lunch and the general fund. And for the committee and for our newest member, as you may know, the school lunch account cannot end the year in deficit. It has to be made whole. So the game plan now is that, assuming that these numbers hold, is that we would make an adjustment probably in April or May. Give myself a little bit of wiggle room there, and with a journal entry and reverse some salaries out of the school lunch revolving into the general fund. That being said, I'm going to, and just one more thing, Ken, before I pass the baton to Margaret, is, and I believe we had this here, and hopefully you can see my cursor. We had presented this at our last meeting, and looking at school year 18-19 revenues, again, just to give you a snapshot of what maybe a normal year would look like. Again, a lot of this is not happening this year, or if it does happen, it's going to be at a much smaller scale come the end of FY21. But in a normal year, Margaret's looking at revenues at or about 2.1 million, and then these are the various subcategories which generates a lot of her revenue. And as Margaret had stated before, being remote for so long, and now hybrid, vending sales commissions and vending machine sales are pretty much flat. A la cartes are pretty much flat. Also, any catering that she would have done in the past is pretty much flat as well. So just to give you some indication of those areas where she has taken significant hits, my term, in terms of revenues for FY21. Alrighty, that being said, I'm going to scroll back up. Go ahead.
No, I was going to actually ask you to do that. Could you go back up and walk us through the munis report? So where that minus 421 squares with the spreadsheet. So yeah, that one there.
So these are actuals taken from munis, and these are based upon year-to-date revenues and year-to-date expenditures. The work that Margaret is doing here, and that she is going to present are her projections for this year.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead and do that? And yeah.
All right, can you see that okay?
We can, yes.
Okay. All right, Margaret, I pass the baton.
Thank you. You did a great job. I should just let you take the rest of it. Good evening, everyone. This is going to be, for the next couple months, a real seesaw back and forth as far as our projections go, with the possibility of reopening everything in April, K-5. It is again going to shift what we're doing and how we do what we do. But that aside, looking at where we are today, we originally had looked at the first line being an estimated 1,000 full remote and hybrid students. Currently, we're serving about 760 students, and that is for our meal pickup distribution on the Wednesdays. We have brought back the breakfast and lunch that we're distributing. So our reimbursement per child per meal period, which is the breakfast and lunch, is $5.53. So if we're looking at the 87 days we have left to get through February to June, it changed my revenues and increased at about $100,000 from where we were, reintroducing that breakfast component. On the next line down, we had originally thought that we had an estimated 2,300 in school that would be eating daily, and our numbers are unfortunately lower. And so we're estimating right now that we're feeding 1,000 students per day across the district, and our reimbursement for those meals, as it is universal free, is coming in at $363 per child. So that has decreased from what we originally had and brought it down about $547,000. Mind you, we're still looking at the mindset that if we don't introduce those students in April, this is where I'm projecting we will come in. If we get to April and we reintroduce those students and we can increase that, which we all want, that number will increase as well. The revenue for the adult meal sales and catering sales, I've increased that. We are seeing that in the beginning of the month, we started to, in February, we started to allow students to purchase a la carte snacks, which is a huge revenue. And the high school is probably our biggest revenue driver. And we can't get to that point with them yet. We're working on how that'll best be suited in the future. But I'm seeing an increase in sales with adults coming through and purchasing items, some snack sales. So I have boosted that number up a bit. The projected food costs, we are relying heavily on what is available to us through the USDA. And currently we're running at about a 34% food cost. So I have dropped that number down from the projected 38% down to 34%, which brought us down about $200,000 on the food cost line. The labor cost, right now I have 7 open positions across the district that to date I don't need to fill. We're kind of, if you will, shell gaming people around the district to cover these open positions where needed. Once we get to a point where we're hearing that we will need to open these schools and have more participation going on, we are going to need to have those bodies on hand. We are not utilizing outside substitutes because of the pandemic, because of having more outside contact within our schools. We would rather be able to utilize staff that we know, that knows our program and knows what we need for our safety of our staff and our students. So at the moment, I'm entertaining applications for people, but I'm holding off until we really know what we're going to do in April. The paper cost line, again, it has dropped down because we're now doing fewer meal distributions, less packaging, less materials having to go out for those meals. That again might change when we get to an April situation. If we are at a point where we're going to have meals scattered throughout the building in different locations, we might find that we need to have more of a container type meal for students, especially our younger kids. We don't want them to have issues walking through the building with food. We want to make sure that it's safe for all parties involved. So we might see a change in that number, but I at the moment I have dropped that down $20,000 from the original 40 I had projected. I dropped the other cost line down a little bit, only because we're not, knock on wood, don't jinx myself, we're not having issues with a lot of repairs. There's not a lot of travel going on. There's not a lot of professional development outside of the district, having to go to training sessions. Everything is virtual for us, and it's free. So that drops our cost down a little bit. So that said, we're down as far as those costs go. But again, with the decrease in sales, I am seeing a bit more of a deficit, about a $45,000 increase in deficit if we don't change things in April. April could bring hopefully increased participation, a decrease in the meals, packaging again may go up depending on what we need to do, and then it's the payroll line. So that really we'll look at that when we get there and we have a better idea of what the plan will be going forward. And then if it goes from further out from K-5 to middle school, we'll address it as we see fit. But again, it will be an ongoing change month to month, I feel. Dan?
So that's a quick overview. And again, I think Ken and members of the committee, as we had previously discussed, we were looking at a shortfall of approximately 464,000 and change. So this is good news, if you will. There's still a shortfall projected. April is kind of the wild card too. The numbers could certainly swing either way, as Margaret said a moment ago. Let's work on the assumption that there is a shortfall here of 112,407. As I said, we would make the adjustment between the general fund, and when we get to that point, I'm just telling you now, I built in a $120,000 adjustment, giving her a slight buffer. I think the previous year, Margaret's carry forward was 5,000 and change. It's not been significant. And again, the issue is a number of the other buildings run deficits. And it's funny, when I do the E&D certification, school lunch is the only account, the only fund where I'm not required, DOI doesn't require us to backfill any of the shortfalls. That's I guess a quick overview, Ken, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that the committee has.
All right, thank you both. Do members want to raise questions about what we've heard or what we've seen in the report?
I have one quick one. Is it fair to assume, just simple math, assuming no additional children will enter school, but if we just say the children that are there now, cohort A, cohort B, that they will double now, because now the A students will be there Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The B students will be there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Could just simple math, could we assume that the hybrid learning would double, that revenue would double, because now you have twice, the same, the population, the count stays the same, but now they're in school for, in theory, 3 days longer each session?
In theory, yes, but I can never predict what is going to happen with student eating. I would go on that theory.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just real rough math, assuming the kids that are getting lunch today are going to continue to get them. Get
You know,
it.
it
if
also
they go back.
it's a different year. Though we keep production records on every single thing that we do, we don't have any way to look at this and say that this is a more popular meal, and or this time of year we know that families run short of funds because it's post Christmas and things like that. It's free meals across the board, and for some families that might be really what they need to hear. For other families, it might just be, if you'd like to get meals, get meals. We have no way of really projecting what this looks like month to month. We originally thought that when we heard free universal meals for all, that this was going to be an absolute windfall, and worried about having to feed 900 students coming out of the high school. But it's unfortunate that we're not seeing those numbers. So every week it's getting a little bit better. Things still drive the business. We really never know day to day where we're going to be.
Thank you.
So
Other members,
I had a
sorry.
related question. I was curious, since you have more meals overall, but I was curious about the high school, if you'd seen any increases there overall as more people become more aware of it, or if they still generally are just not taking the meals.
I would love to tell you, as I said, that it's gangbusters and we can't keep up. We're averaging now, our highest number is 150 meals going out the door. She is offering up to 4 selections a day. She has signage. It's mentioned over the intercom. She's out there. We have life skills students involved in helping us to stand there and promote with us as well. And I don't know, it really is a tough sell to understand why. It can go home and go to your sibling, to your parent, to whomever, but we're just not seeing what we really thought would be the draw to take those meals.
So I just am curious because you can't predict, are we wasting food there? I mean, what is happening with the food that's not taken?
She has, good question. She has really reduced her production and has it down to a science. We're covering 4 exits when they leave the building.
Okay.
And she has a very detailed listing of how many meals are going out of each selection and how many are coming back. So she's keeping her production very, very tight and watching what's going on out each door, because it's consistent who's leaving those doors daily. So I know that she has brought her waste down to minimal, which is the goal, because we don't want to have any waste whatsoever. Because we really have nothing else to do with it.
I mean, I also wondered theoretically, if we did have waste, there are programs you can donate it to. So I would hope it's not just going to waste, even though it's better if we don't have waste. I was really curious on 2 fronts.
No, I agree.
We don't want to have waste. So
no, we don't. We do have other outlets as well. A number of these meals that are going out are a prepackaged type meal that can be utilized another time.
yeah.
We have, again, the Wednesday meal distribution. We have SPED students that are there for meals every day as well. So she's really keeping a good eye on what's going on within her unit.
The April's the big question mark. So do we have, I don't think we can predict this, but do we have any thoughts on, since we don't know April, do we have a process by which we're going to estimate April? Are we asking families if they plan to eat lunch at school if they are in school all day? Because I know some families are less comfortable with that. Like, do we even have we considered asking that in some of the surveys we're doing, so we can help plan ahead in terms of how many meals we're going to be having theoretically?
I don't know that it is on any survey at the moment. I know there are surveys that are in the works, but I'm not sure that that is one of those questions that we're planning to ask or that we've thought of putting out there. I also don't know what that will look like, because April to the high school, to my knowledge, is no change. It will be exactly the same with them leaving at 11 o'clock. Correct me if I'm wrong, Daryl.
Well, that question would really apply to all the schools, not just the high school, because I know, I mean, even in the younger grades, if we have twice as many kids in the school, but the distancing is closer, or we have to sort out the distancing, there may be some families. I guess it's harder to assume what families will do regarding lunch in that situation.
Exactly.
So that's I guess why I'm asking, because I know we asked them about the buses, and it seems like this might be another area where if you have twice as many kids and you want to reduce waste, but also be able to feed them if they choose to get lunch, we may need to get some data on that.
Mm-hmm. It's much like, for us, it's much like the start of school year, over and over. It's Groundhog Day, and we keep running the same scenario where when they come in, we never really know, but we start off with a menu that, in the event, with each lunch coming in the event that we need to cook more, we're cooking to order and not overproducing and having the waste. There really is, we even if we were to put out a pre-order, it'll never be concise with the numbers that come in. Even when we have daily counts within our schools right now, the numbers are not exact. People are late, people change their mind, people don't raise their hand. So there's a lot of things that we have to consider, but I don't have any new managers that are really uncertain as to how best to run this without having a waste concern. So they're doing their very best to make sure that we don't run into that problem.
I appreciate that. I was just thinking 2 steps ahead. So thank you for clarifying.
Anytime.
Do other members have questions? I have a dense question for you, Dan. I apologize. Just going back to slides from where you're at. I know these are the projections. So this one, so how do we go, and again, I just want to treat me simple-minded. We have an available budget of $421,000 in the red, right? That's what Munis is telling us now. How does that change into 112 in the red by the end of the year?
So what this doesn't tell us, Ken, is her account, Margaret's account, is probably current through either the end of December or January. I want to say December. Does that sound right, Margaret, or is it January?
It's December. Everything falls a month late.
Yep. So any revenues from January, and for that matter, February, even though we're only to March 2nd, those haven't been posted here. So that's that's one of the variances here. I just don't have those numbers as to what they would be. So obviously that would, that reduces the expenditures, and again, the encumbrances are primarily, I believe those are just the payroll encumbrances that are here. So there are almost 2 months of reconciliations that haven't been done here to tweak that available budget number there.
So I was just looking and trying to do the mental math to see if the difference between that number and the difference between the projections added up to 112. I assume that they do, but we'll see that as it comes in future months. Just looking sideways. So you're projecting $622,000 in revenue, plus I guess a couple months back, right? With expenses of $600 and some $1,000.
And I just want to, if I may stress,
Yeah.
Margaret's figures here. These are projections, a snapshot in time, so to speak. And again, I think the wild card here really is what happens in April. That can swing that number in either direction.
But all the labor is encumbered for the year.
Yes, I believe so. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. If that's the case, then I guess it makes more sense to looking at the two, trying to square the two documents together. Okay.
I guess I have a follow-up to that statement you made, Dan. How if April does come, how could that swing us in a negative direction? Because if the labor is encumbered and we're assuming revenue on Margaret's thing based on the current student population, I'm just not sure how selling more lunches we would end up further negative.
So Margaret has 7 vacancies that she would probably look to backfill, number one. Number two, there would be some additional packaging cost. I believe that she spoke about earlier as well. There may be some additional product increases that we're not anticipating at this time. But the big nut would be the labor. And frankly, with the labor, depending upon schedules, maybe keyword maybe the associated benefits with those costs.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, I assume this is. I appreciate your input, and hopefully, you know, we'll continue to get updated on this regularly. So there's you know, no surprises. And I appreciate the hard work. It's hard to predict, you know, who's going to pick up the lunches on the way out. So
Ken, I'd like to, if I may, I'd like to recommend that this be a standing item for the subcommittee. And not that we need Margaret every month, but I'd like to, you know, give a brief update, or I will, if you're good with it, give a brief update because this does impact our bottom line with the general fund, without doubt.
yeah, absolutely, I think that's important. All right, so should we return to the beginning of the meeting since Ms. Lynch isn't here, and
Absolutely.
then get to that when we get to it in the agenda?
Yep. So Margaret, thank you. We appreciate it very much. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
And we'll see you at the
Thank
next
you.
rodeo. All right, so the next item, Ken, is talking about FY20 excess and deficiency. I'm going to scroll down here, get to the attachment. And the committee has seen this before. This is the sheet from DOR when our E&D was certified this past December, approximately 1.4 million. And again, just something I just want to point out is, you know, given our operating budget for FY21 at the 102 million, DOR is recommending that, I guess in a perfect world, that we would have a balance of approximately 5.1 million. We don't. We are far from that. And I assume that this is here on the agenda to talk about the possibility of using a sum or a value of this 1.4 for the 22 budget. and maybe we'll get into that discussion when we get into 22. The important takeaway here is that if we do use anything from E&D from the FY20 certified number, the 1.4, that would need to be voted by the full committee, obviously prior to June 30 of 2021, because on July 1, we lose access to E&D and until it is recertified again, either late fall or early winter of next year. So, Ken, any questions about the E&D or?
Yeah, before I turn it open to the committee, I guess there's just 2 quick points. One, our policy, the 5% is the max, right?
Yes, it is. Yep. Yes.
But we'd have to use it if it was more than that. But our policy recommends it not get below 1%. It's just a recommendation. But that's policy, where's the number? 4660, right? So when we get to the fiscal year 22 discussion, that's the committee's policy for a recommended number. We haven't always been there, right? So of what it should be. When we get to that conversation, I think the key question about how much of this do we recommend using is how much we might anticipate replacing it with closeout for next year. Those numbers are of course connected, right? We could use all 1.4 million of this E&D, which probably isn't a very good way to do it. If we thought we might have a chance of coming to $8 or $9 or $1 million in E&D next year, right? Obviously, it's probably better to bring it forward in a revolving account than to take that approach. But that's probably a fiscal year 22 conversation when we get to it in the agenda of having a good, clear view of what we think, what our projection for closeout figures will be for this year.
Yep, and I've got that. And when we get to that part of the 21 budget discussion, I'll put that up on the screen. I made a couple of comments in my narrative about that, but I've done some work on that today. And again, my work are just projections, but I think you'll like what I've done. Please don't keep my fingers crossed.
All right, good. So we'll get to that conversation when it comes in turn, because that's really, talking about, this year and next year rather than last year. But do people have questions about this agenda item, last year's certification?
And Ken, I should point out into the committee, we were fortunate with the FY20 work in that there weren't any hits, if you will, with E&D. As part of the closeout for FY20, we made a couple of adjustments between the general fund and revolving accounts, in particular athletics. And we shifted some costs out of athletics to the general fund, reduced the value in the general fund, but in doing so made athletics whole. And again, aside from the shortfalls in several of the school lunch revolving accounts, there were no other deficits to the E&D certification process. And that would be the goal this year, as we approach the fourth quarter of the fiscal year, is to look at all our revolving accounts again, and where there are any current deficits or anticipated deficits, to make those accounts whole, if we can, with the general fund, so that again, when we go through the certification with E&D late fall, early winter next year, again, we won't sustain any hits that may reduce the potential value of the certified number.
All right, so other questions about last year's E&D? If not, maybe we can move forward into the next items on the agenda, which is updates on 21.
So the first item here are the 21 grants, and again, you've got here before you, and I'm going to scroll through this rather quickly, and I'm happy to come back to this, but I'd like to focus our attention for the time being on the first two grants here. the school reopening and the ESSER grant, and in particular the school reopening. As you can see, we have an unencumbered balance in the school reopening grant of approximately 120,333. I'm sorry, 133. My eyes are deceiving me. And dollars and 29 cents. This is in essence going to be fully expended. And again, the reason for that is that in speaking with and meeting with Deputy Superintendent Burlow today, we will be looking to make adjustments between the general fund and this grant here where we can, where it's appropriate. Again, when we get to the general fund, as I had presented to the committee in the past, we are charging any and all COVID-related cost to the undesignated balance in the general fund, and that way it just makes it easier for reporting purposes. That being said, we're looking at those numbers in the general fund to see what can be reversed back to this grant here, and thus reduce this balance. These dollars are available also back in December. The DESE had made us aware that these could be carried forward to the end of December of 2021. The original ending date was December of 20. It's been pushed out another year. And as excuse me, was discussed last evening, this grant here was used for a number of purchases: Chromebooks, 1,200 Chromebooks, 50 hotspots, online textbook subscriptions, cleaning supplies, PPE for students and staff, bathroom partitions, unemployment cost. Our first unemployment bill that we received this year was approximately $270,000. And you say, wow. And the reason for that is we had not received an invoice dating back to last March. So of that $270,000 invoice, excuse me, we $200,000 was charged off to this grant, which was huge in terms of that, without question. So before I move on, I'd be happy to answer any questions about this grant here.
I just have a quick clarification.
Sure, please.
Are those expenses that were not originally encumbered under this, are they due to the change in regulations about how much the funds can be used? Or is it funds that it's a timing issue that we just haven't spent them yet?
So Malay, are you referring to the expenses in the general fund, which you'll see in a couple minutes?
Yes, that you're going to now charge back to this. I'm curious why they wouldn't have been charged this. I'm curious timing. Is it a timing issue or is it a change in what we're allowed to spend them on and when?
It's really a timing issue. We're continuing to charge off expenditures to that appropriation where there is no value, there is no allocation to that, and we're looking to look at those charges and see if we can then reverse them back here to this grant here. For example, if there were any PPE purchases made in the past week or two or three, and the initial encumbrance was made to undesignated, those will be looked at and perhaps charged off here if the dollars are there. And as you can see, there's almost 90,000, 89,841 unencumbered in one line here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was curious because I recall the numbers from the general fund lines were, or whatever you're calling it, the COVID line, I guess. I recall those were higher than this, so that's why I was trying to sort that out.
They were, yep, and we've made adjustments. The appropriation is the undesignated, but you're right. It's called the COVID line. That's very creative here. But again, helps us to allocate the cost elsewhere if need be.
Is the distribution of the funds according to the line items just our own doing, or is that the way the money is separated by the designation from the grant?
We allocate the funds accordingly
Okay.
within the grants.
And unemployment is a billable charge for this. That's clear.
Yes, it is. Yep. As a matter of fact, when we were on a call with the DESI 6 months ago, whatever it was, and Jay Sullivan was speaking to that. I remember taking the notes and putting in bold black print font that unemployment was an allowable cost. And mind you as well, in the grant narrative, these are reviewed by DESI, so they're looking at what we're requesting as to how to use the funds. So they're aware of that request for that $200,000.
Theoretically, they've been aware of things we've tried to charge in the past and didn't notice until years later, right? But because they aren't that many people, right, down there. So should we move on to the next thing you want to discuss?
And again, the ESSER grant here, this is fully expended, almost 177,176,898. And again, primarily using this for PPE purchases and also for purchasing Lexia licenses. So that's fully expended. And then we get into our other grants, and I'm just going to skip Ken down to the DESI report for a second because I know that was a concern. I'm happy to come back to this in a moment, but I just want to skip down to that for a second. And I do want to point out that we did get some additional money from the DESI, stimulus money, if you will. And it's this last grant here. It's $10,000, and this was a recent award within the past month. And Margaret can use this and will use this to offset some of her school lunch cost this year. But if I can just skip down here. All right. So we had talked about this last month. This is a report that I receive every month from the DESI, and this is the end result of drawdowns. This shows us the value of the respective grants that can be drawn down from DESI. The drawdowns are done every month. Going back to FY19, there's still $200 left. Yes, there is, in the 240 grants, and we're going to, that'll be gone next month. There's also $200 left in the FY19 Title I grants. That'll be gone, and those grants will be closed out. Again, the grant reports that I showed you, the munis grant reports are current. Any encumbrances or expenditures, they're in there. This is not necessarily the case here with this sheet here, but this gives, I think, a nice summary as to where we are in terms of these expenditures. FY20, the Title II, again, almost 98,000 has remaining there. And as you can see, I'm just going to scroll down here with my cursor. We have spent 9,700 in the 21 Title II, and as I believe I had stated in our last report, the goal is to correct these charges here, and the goal is to spend down this almost $98,000. that has to happen. Then there are some small values remaining in FY20 grants, and as I had reported last month, these are multi-year grants where we can go back and make some adjustments so that we can spend down these dollars here. If you look at FY21, you'll see that in our 240 grant, there's a balance of 1.3 million. That's the amount that is still remaining to be drawn down. However, if you look at the munis report, you'll show a lesser number, which reflects current activity for that grant. Our drawdowns again are a month behind in terms of requesting that revenue. Otherwise, the 21 grants, again, these can be brought forward. It's the game plan would be that these would be spent down for the most part prior to the end of the year. We have some work to do in our Title I grants, but we're very much aware of that. So before I leave this, again, the takeaway is that the Title II, the 20 Title II, this needs to be addressed rather immediately, and it will. I believe we have a grants meeting tomorrow. It's on my calendar, I believe. I think it's for 10 o'clock, so we'll talk about that. And then getting rid of these small balances here so that we can clean up FY20 and jump into 22 in earnest.
Can I ask a process question? Just because I've seen this form probably, I don't know how many times, but we don't see the details of what gets charged. I mean, we do technically, but we don't really see the details of what gets charged to each of these or what kinds of services are coming from these. I mean, we see the warrants, but that's hard to keep track of. So when you say we're spending down almost $98,000 of the Title II grant, where is that going? I mean, just in general. I mean, are there particular programs it goes to fund or particular positions, or is it moving money around? And I should know the answer to that, but offhand, when you're looking at that and talking about that, I'm curious. I don't know if I could explain that to someone. So,
Malaya, I'd be happy to run these reports or to run a Title II report in detail so that you can see the actual activity. I mean, these are abbreviated reports. It doesn't show any details. I don't want to conjecture and be wrong.
Absolutely. And I don't need every little thing we charge to them. I'm more curious about, in general, are there particular positions we tend to charge to these, or particular services or particular expenses? If someone asked me, I couldn't explain that. So when you're talking about expending money that's a couple of years old and I'm not sure, I don't recall what it was for at the time, it might be helpful just to have a sense of where that's fitting in with today's budget picture and spending.
Sure thing. So Title II, FY 2021. I'm just asking, what would you like to see in terms of the detail?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it later too. I just was asking the more general question about, where, I mean, we see the warrants, so we kind of can figure that out, but in general, where some of these funds translate to in the budget, the spending picture. And I don't need exact specifics. It's more of a generality of where they're used, because we're trying to figure out complicated things for the next year. So it would just be helpful.
Is it fair to say that in general, these funds are supposed to be given to support low-income students? I mean,
yeah.
Like, is that a fair statement, Dan? I'm not saying what.
Well, certainly, Title I is one dedicated to that without question. But I mean, that's not the case. Well, the school reopening, that was part of the calculation for sure. But those dollars were spent across the district.
Yeah, and I know those two because those are recent, and I know Title I. But some of the other ones, I mean, I know where some of them go, but I couldn't explain where all of them go. And Like the Title I and Title IV, probably and Title III are the ones that we don't hear about as often. So,
So Malaya, if I can interpret your question, if that's okay, I think
Yeah.
what Malaya might be asking, and please tell me if I'm wrong, is we don't necessarily need like a long
list.
line item list of where the charges go,
Right.
but just general categories of the sorts of things that get charged to that. I think
Exactly.
because I think we want talking points. We
Yes.
trust the line items to you.
Yes.
But just generally, these funds go to pay for teacher salaries because there's part of contributing towards students who have particular needs. I think that's kind of
Exactly. That would
the
be
level
helpful.
of answer
That would be
we're,
great.
we're
That's what
looking
I
for.
mean. It doesn't need to be complicated.
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
I just wanted to clarify a clarification question on something you said. I just wanted to know what you meant by it. You said we have work to do on the I think it was the Title I. Do you mean work to do just like on your end of doing the math, or do we have work to do as we've not made the proper expenditures yet that would qualify for that grant? Like what does work to do mean?
So if you looked at the DESI report, there was a pretty significant balance in there, and that's what I meant by that, is that we've got to tackle that balance. Let me just go there for a second. So the Title I right here, this year's allocation was 249,000. We've spent just under 25,000, so there's a balance there of 224,000. And when I made that comment, I'm just looking at that balance. That's all, and needing to begin to address these funds here. But let's go to the munis report and see what that's telling us in terms of actual activity. So here's this is the FY21 Title I grant, again, the 249 and change. Again, there's an unencumbered balance here of $220,519.75. So in terms of activity, we've spent just under 29,028,531. So that's what I was referring to there, Ken.
But at the end of the day, there's teachers doing activities that are Title I related, that it's really just bookkeeping that we have to adjust it. It's not as though we're worried that we're not doing this event. It kind of related to Malaya's last question. I don't think if it's just like doing journal entries to move places to one or the other, we trust your office will do that. I think the questions were just in the sense of, what are the activities that are being done that will be qualified to charge to that? I can't imagine we're not doing those things. It's just a matter of doing a journal entry to move it to the right fund line, right?
Correct.
That's what we mean by work to do, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Should we move to our next agenda item?
Sure thing. Thank you. So athletic revolving, Jen Lynch, again, I apologize. She had a last minute.
I'm sorry, Dan, just 1 second. So on the agenda, the next item was to talk about regional transportation and revolving accounts with C. Are we gonna it's okay if we do it out of order.
Oh,
I just want to make sure we don't forget.
I apologize. I apologize. Regional transportation. So let's talk about that very quickly. We have yet to receive our first disbursement for FY21. Typically, that would be in January or February. Here we are, March 2nd. No one, I've been checking with my colleagues about this, has received their initial payment yet. When we get into the FY21 revenues, you'll see it in living black and white, and some red. But I have had some conversations with Jay Sullivan over the past couple days, as recent as this morning. And I gave him an update. First of all, I gave him an update on the AA transportation settlement agreement 2 or 3 weeks ago. And he confirmed then, and he confirmed the past 2 days, as recent as this morning, that the amendment will have a positive impact on our reimbursements this year, most likely in June. In my email exchange with him, I said, Jay, if you remove the amendment, which hasn't been processed yet, it was I just got the signed documentation from AA just the other day, so I wasn't doing the amendment to get that thing signed. I have it now. I said, just remove the amendment. Could you give me a projection as to what you have allocated for Wachusett? And he didn't. He said, do your amendments, and that's going to impact, in a good way, your disbursement, reimbursement this year. So the takeaway is there is no payment yet. The initial payment hasn't been received yet. We check the vendor web on a daily basis, looking for that payment. And number two, the amendment, when filed, will impact in a good way our second reimbursement in June. And what these numbers may be, I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. And that's the unfortunate part. When we do get to the review of the revenues for 21, I'll show you the numbers that I'm using to project out revenues for the balance of the year. So I'd be happy to answer any questions about that.
So presumably you're going to be conservative until the actual dollar sign is in front of you, because that's the way business folks should be. If we receive a June reimbursement distribution, what have you, that is higher than your estimation, right? Is that what is our deadline for putting that into a transportation stabilization account? I know we might have missed a deadline last year, right? So what is the deadline for making sure that money doesn't just go to E&D?
Yeah, great point. We actually did make the deadline last year, but it was we were right at the deadline, June 30. It's going to be my recommendation, Ken, at a future meeting, probably in April, maybe early May at the latest, that we have a discussion. We may even talk about tonight for a little bit about what should go into transportation stabilization to assist us with the FY22 budget. But the drop dead deadline, if you will, is June 30th, 2021.
And of course, that all probably is factored into by what settlement we have for AA for this year, right? Which hopefully we can legal can and y'all can make some progress into figuring out. I'm sure you're super excited to get right back into that conversation again, but
yeah. So just a quick note on that. We're still working on the van pool settlement, excuse me, for FY20. Unfortunately, the window is closing. We did bring that forward into 21, but we have until June 30 of this year to expend those dollars. Otherwise, the purchase order gets closed out, and that money will fall to the bottom line for FY21. In terms of a settlement agreement this year, FY21 for AA, again, similar to last year, if there is no closure on that prior to June 30, then we would bring forward the encumbrance into 22, and we would have through June 30 to resolve that. Otherwise, we close it out and it falls to the bottom line. So actually, our bottom line for 21, I'm kind of jumping ahead just a little bit, but the bottom line for 21 is also impacted by that carry forward for Vanpool from FY20. I don't have the exact figure here in front of me in terms of the encumbrance, but if that doesn't get resolved, then again, the sum of money that would have to be allocated someplace else. Maybe we would need to look next year to tap into E&D. I don't know. And again, I'm taking a leap of faith here, but I'm just kind of thinking aloud here that if FY20 doesn't get resolved with Vanpool in the next couple of months, that will hit our bottom line for 21. Gets rolled into E&D or becomes part of the E&D process.
My super useful suggestion is let's get that settled before then. Yeah, eh?
Without equivocation, absolutely, positively, without equivocation, absolutely.
I'm surprised to hear that, because I recall when we started, they had no problem with the things we were talking about, and we had no problem with them, but we were on hold pending the AA settlement. And now that we've finished that, I'm kind of surprised that it's just because we took so long that they've changed their mind on what they are wanting. Or, I mean, you probably can't talk about that, so I mean, in detail. But I'm surprised to hear that it's delayed and that there's no resolution pending.
Well, and Malay, to your point, again, just got to kind of be careful here what we talk about.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the energy, perspiration, if you will, was dedicated to the AA matter, and Vanpool, took a back seat, and I think that's that's a point I'd like to share with the committee, is that so much time and effort was dedicated to AA, due in large part to the fact that it would help us with our 21 budget and in whatever capacity, reimbursement, that Vanpool was out in the bullpen waiting to be called into the game. To use a baseball analogy.
I won't say any more about that because you know my opinion, so I will keep them to myself. But I appreciate that. I just hope it's resolved quickly, so we're not again stuck with funds that end up in E&D when we really need them for other things like last year.
Any
All right, well,
other?
I'm sure you'll keep us up to date on that. Are there other questions about transportation from the committee? And does that settlement with Van? Well, never mind. I know the answer to that. So go ahead. Next, you want to go to the next item on the agenda?
Sure thing. I'm happy to answer. We're good. We'll move on.
We're good. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So athletic revolving, and again, Jen Lynch had a last minute glitch and couldn't make it. So again, you've got a budget report out of munis. The carry forward was just under $108,000 for the high school, and then the carry forward for the other buildings. But the focus here is looking at athletics in at the high school. So I just want to there we go. And since I submitted this to you, I do want to point out that the news actually is not all that bad, because in Jen's work here, she had included salary cost for coaches. The coach's stipend here, $53,664. The athletic trainer, $18,006. And then further down, she had some other payroll costs in here as well. So that's so the good news is that her shortfall is not, and again, coach's stipends for winter almost 50,000. The trainer again for 9,000. Those should not. be part of the revolving account. Again, this was an Excel document. So her shortfall is not the 262, 283 you see here, but it's roughly 41,000 and change. But still, what I'd like to share with you is that there have been some changes from December to now. Back in December, she had projected revenues of $222,250. Now she's projecting revenues of 179,206. So there's a decrease there, 43,000 in change. Back in December, she had projected out expenditures of 126,537. And now her expenditures, again, only to the revolving account. It's not the 441. Again, the 441 included payroll cost. Her expenditures out of the revolving account is $220,319. So her expenditures have gone up almost $94,000. What's happened? Clearly, she has sharpened her pencil in terms of expenditures for the balance of the year. As you know, we're into per the MIAA, we're into fall 2 now. So she has a better idea of transportation cost, for example, than she did back in December. So right now, and again, her total revenues, she's including the carry forward. Again, as had been reported, and as you saw in the munis report, of just under $108,000. Her user fees are way down. So again, the big change, one of the bigger changes, is the revenues are down significantly. So how do we fix this? And again, when I get to looking at the projections in the general fund, similar to at the end of FY20, we would once again make adjustments in FY21 between the athletic revolving and school and the general fund, so that it would be whole. The athletic revolving would be whole. I have a separate document. I could probably put it up here, but I don't want to get too many documents up on the screen here. But that shows the shortfall of approximately 41,000 in change. Any questions about athletics? Athletics?
I have one.
Please.
Well, I have a couple, but one I will save because it's not really athletics. It's a bigger question. Is the transportation cost going to be impacted at all by the new DESI bus guidelines? Even though regardless, does that apply to athletics as well as school busing? Because that was one of the major increases in expenses in athletics. And I would think logically it would apply to athletics as well as regular busing.
It's a great question, and the answer is yes. I guess a question that I can't answer is what is Jen Lynch's plan moving forward with busing? Now that we theoretically can put more students on a bus.
Wait, I don't agree with it, but it's the rule, so I'm asking.
And I'm not passing judgment either. I guess I'm agreeing with you that theoretically we could put more students on a bus given the revised DESI guidelines and certainly shore up some of the transportation costs. Yeah. But will we do that? I don't have an answer to that.
I do, Dan.
All right, please jump in.
Yeah, we talked about this. In terms of having students have assigned seats, because we're getting, we have to contact trace and so forth. So once that came out, because that was a large cost, Malaria, you're right. And we're hoping to consolidate some of those buses and vans so we don't have to spend as much.
Okay. And my second question is really beyond us, but I'll just put it out there for Daryl. For consideration, or at least a question. Has the state talked at all about the CDC guideline that says there shouldn't be athletics and adjusting their, I mean, that's a whole bigger question. I don't need an answer. I'm more curious if the state has even discussed it.
Not at all.
Okay. Thank you.
One quick question from this list, and I admit I'm looking at my own list here from the email. Under busing, the last, it might just be a cutoff of the page, but it looks like there's no value in money next to winter season busing. I didn't know if that was an oversight, or because it goes athletic trainer 9,000, busing winter season only. There's nothing listed, and then stipends. I don't know if that was a.
I do see that, Ken. I'll check on that. I do.
And I presume the spring season is accumulating both the, whatever you want to call fall 2 and spring.
Yeah, well, fall 2 is actually goes from middle of February thereabouts, very much March, April, middle March towards the end of March. So if there are any other costs here, again, that it's not reflected here, then well, she does have spring busing here, almost 48,000, 47,600 for the spring. So that's a number that potentially potentially could be adjusted, but I'll speak to Jen about that, her thoughts on that.
Do other members have questions about the athletic?
And this, Ken and members of the committee, this was actually one of the bigger adjustments that we made at the close of approximately $70,000 that we reversed or adjusted back into the general fund to make that whole. And again, that would be the game plan. The goal this year again is to clean up any negative accounts and make them whole with a nominal balance going forward.
I mean, I could be mistaken, but in the 10 years of my committee, I think we've changed. This is before your time, Dan. Like what we charge to revolving and what we don't for athletics. I do think we've moved more of the expenses into the general fund. And Daryl is nodding, which is, I mean, that's neither here nor there. It's just suggesting that, the way we were looking at these reports a couple months ago, where, former subcommittee chair Dennis was pointing out correctly that the way we looked at it was, hey, we've got a balance. Why are we talking about raising fees? I think we do need to maybe have a philosophical conversation at some point about the fact that may not 100% really be true, because we're moving expenses into the general account on a routine basis that we spent out of revolving 10 years ago, salaries and the athletic director's salary in particular, I think used to be paid out of revolving way back when. So I don't think it's not a conversation for tonight, but I think it's a conversation in the future about where, how much should the taxpayers be paying for athletics? How much should the athletes' families be paying for athletics? I don't know that we don't need to have that conversation, but it's a conversation that y'all might want to promote at some point, because more and more comes out of the general fund, more and more, it's fewer things, teachers and books and other things that we're paying for out of the general fund, right?
And Ken, the reason for the activity last year and the estimated projected activity this year is that I'm looking to either minimize or frankly negate any hits to that we may incur during the E&D process, and I'm of the opinion that if I've got cash in the general fund, to make the appropriate adjustment between the general fund and the revolving, I can certainly leave it there. I could leave it, a negative number in the revolving. It just becomes a hit come next November, December, and I think truly, to your point is well taken. By making the adjustments between the general fund and the revolving, it kind of belies the actual cost in the revolving. For example, if there's a $5,000 balance at the end of the fiscal year, well, not really, because I shifted 50,000 out of there over to the general fund. So we're actually in the hole. That's what you're referring to, correct?
Yeah, I'm not questioning I think you're doing good practice in terms of backfilling the revolving account deficit. I'm just saying we as a committee should at some point have a conversation about increasing revenue in that line, which may have to be through user fees, if that's appropriate, right? In terms of shifting some of the burden there from the taxpayer to the user in an equitable kind of way. It's not a conversation for tonight necessarily, but it's a philosophical conversation you might want to have next year when we have space to consider it. Darla, do you have something? You came off mute, so
I do. I think it's probably time, Ken, to assess where we're at with that. We typically do that every 3 to 4 years. In reference to the spending, and you're right, we've moved a lot of this into the general fund that was typically in revolving accounts. So, and we've not increased fees in a while. So I think we need to take a good look at that over the summer, starting for the fall, though.
Yeah, and I think it's just a conversation that might be a good summer meeting conversation to talk about what principles you would use to use that. My bias of cheap sports are going to or always fund the expensive sports, and so you might just want to think about that as you move forward. High participation sports that cost you nothing, fund your 3 expensive sports, right?
Cross country. Winter.
Cross country and track, fun, football, ice hockey, and golf, right? So
golf isn't that much. Yeah, well, it is.
It is.
I know that's true because of the greens fees. I just want to add to that though, that if you are planning to implement changes for the fall, then we really need to be able to give families a heads up on that, because I know they register for fall sports earlier than August, so we would need to do that soon. I mean, ideally we would have done it before we plan next year's budget, because that impacts the budget, but since obviously it's a weird year, I don't want us to be dealing with that in August and springing it on people that are playing sports starting in the fall. So I hope we can be fair to our families in considering that ahead of time.
And sometimes fee increases like that, I know, we do regular reviews and whatnot every 3 to 4 years, but if fee increases can be, I'm not going to use this word incorrectly, but so I don't even try. They should be gradually brought in, right? So instead of like every 5 years being like, oh, now it costs 30% more, having a pegged 5% increase per year is probably more palatable to people. Anyway, we don't need to belabor this now. We have bigger fish to fry, I think, tonight, right?
We do, and kind of getting into the nitty gritty here in a moment or two. The last 2 revolving accounts that I want to speak to here, which will impact the 22 budget, circuit breaker in school choice. And in circuit breaker, we brought forward in our tuitions, as I have reported in the past, $1 million plus, and in school choice we brought forward 372,000 as well. In essence, pretty much all of last year's allocation, and that almost 1.4, and change, actually 1.4, certainly helped us, or is helping us tremendously with the 21 budget, and can help us with the 22 budget as well. I'd like to talk about circuit breaker for a moment. Member Mills had sent me an email, which I did share with the committee about this year's carry forward, the million plus. And again, that has been fully expended. With circuit breaker, you have up to a year later to expend those dollars, so they have been fully expended. This year, as I had reported in our last meeting, our estimated payment this year is approximately 3.2 million. And I've got a number of spreadsheets, Ken, but I won't put them up here. I'll probably confuse folks, so I'll leave it as that. And again, the first payment that we received last fall was an estimate from the DESI, and when the state budget was approved at the end of mid to late December, we received another payment, and that's going to hold true for the year. Right now, this moment in time, our total tuitions across the board, circuit breaker, the general fund, and the 240 grant, we're looking at approximately 6.7 million in estimated expenditures. The balance, the estimated balance at this moment in time in circuit breaker, and again, we still have several months left in the year, but if the year were to end next week, we would be looking at an approximate balance of approximately 1.8 million as a balance that we would bring forward. That 1.8 million would have to be expended at the end of FY22, again, because it would be a carry forward from 21. So again, that number will certainly be reviewed on an ongoing basis. Christine Smith has done great work in terms of students remaining in district, but there are times when we can't meet a child's need, and a child will go to another program, so there was one adjustment this week. I think I reported to the committee last month we were looking at about a 1.9 million balance. So now it's 1.8. Do I think it's going to go from 1.8 to a million over the next several months? No, I don't. No, I don't. But I think we can certainly look at a carry forward, maybe 1.5, 1.6. And I do want to drill down on that number with Christine, with Director Smith, in the next day or two at the latest, and because that's going to help us with our 22 budget.
Yeah. So to that, Dan, just and then I'll open the questions for people too. So if I look at the budget book that you sent us today, right? I haven't had time to go through it in depth because I had work and just got home. But you estimate the carry forward for fiscal year 21 from circuit breaker as 1.2, and then fiscal year 22 as 2.25, which I assume you're assuming that you'd want to carry some through to the next year, which is why that might be a little low. Is that so? Yep. So that 1.2 carry forward, you're hoping that that's going to be maybe 3, 4, maybe more, $100,000 more than that?
Yes, it is, Ken. And again, that was a conservative number. But now that the rubber is going to hit the road, and we really need to drill down on our number, that 1.2 is going to be bumped up. Yes.
Yeah. So as you talk about the rubber meeting the road a few minutes ago, this is a place where when we have a budget hearing, and maybe we can have a discussion about this, so you can give us some more insight. That's $600,000 is a big number, right? In terms of taking that off the top of our requests to the town, right? So would we anticipate that in changing, your presentation for next week and ultimately the vote, that we would try and build in a less conservative number into the into the projection for next year?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And this and to the committee, I mean, this is kind of the place where we want to bounce these ideas around, right? So I'm throwing that on the table to see if somebody's going to be like, oh my gosh, we can't do something like that, or oh yes, we definitely should be, right?
And Ken, if I may, you know, I think Daryl knows this. I tend to be conservative in my projections and so on and so forth. Just me. You know, one of the things that I had said to Daryl when I first started a couple of years ago is that we got to build up our reserves. We got to build up school choice, and we got to build up circuit breaker because and this is no fault of anyone's. And we were spending the money. You were using the money. You know, if we got 400,000 in school choice, it got spent. It's all good. That's what it's there for. And the same for circuit breaker. It's all good. But you know, as I said in the beginning of this discussion, you know, the almost 1.4 between, you know, the circuit breaker, you know, tuitions and the school choice certainly has helped us in 21, and it'll help us going forward in 22. So yes, we are sharpening the pencil in terms of the carry forward for circuit breaker to the point where you know, I'm leaving my comfort zone, for lack of a better term, but I think it's important that we do that to support, you know, respond to the towns, hear the towns, but at the same time, you know, be as responsive and responsible to the district and ultimately to the students.
And the 2.2 that you estimate in the budget book, or 2.25 for next year's circuit breaker, right? I mean, there's no
Yes.
particular reason to think that that's going to go down. So are we kind of baking in having money to carry forward into 23 by estimating 2.2 next year? Is that the way I should be thinking about this?
We are, Ken, that's correct. And again, that number there is a conservative figure. I know that Director Smith, in speaking with her, she is losing 1 or 2 students that will impact our claims for 22. You know, going from 3.2 to what have you. But do I see a $1 million shift? I don't. And one thing that I believe she will be doing, or her staff will be doing, is that they're going to be filing an application for extraordinary relief for FY21. But what that application does is that it gives her great data. And granted, our budget will be done at that point, but it gives her great data in terms of what we can expect as a potential reimbursement in 22. And again, we'll just, you know, if her net claims are $4 million, then we you know, we got the number. Now we just need to project out. Okay, so is it 65% of 4 million? Is it 70% of 4 million? What, you know, what's the percentage? But that'll go a long way. But yes, that 22 number will help us with 23, but we have to be cautious. We have to be cautious because, again, every year the threshold does change in terms of what is an allowable expense. But don't forget too that as part of the claim process in 22, we can factor in sped transportation. As you may recall, it's a phase in with the SOA, and I believe, and again, the state budget is far from done for FY22, but there is a phase in of 25% for sped transportation through the circuit breaker process. Again, remains to be seen as we go through the state budget process if that remains through the budget process. You know, as you know, it was cut in 21.
So the members have questions about, since this is a pretty big number, I just want to like circle it out for people to ask questions about this particular topic.
And Ken, in the committee, just so that, again, we're amongst friends, for lack of a better term, you know, we were conservative when we were working on the initial budget, but now we're sharpening our pencil. We're sharpening our pencil.
So I'm only asking this because we have a new member who may not know this, or maybe you do, Jeff. Maybe you know all about the budget, but the circuit breaker and school choice have the circuit breaker has very specific things it can be charged or used for, tuitions basically, and other things with transportation now, correct?
Assuming that the implementation, the SOA, Student Opportunity
Right.
Act, is implemented in the FY22 budget. That was the intent in 21,
Yeah.
but as you all know, it was cut.
I'm really only asking. I know that. I was really just asking so you could explain that in case people watching may not know.
And again, Member Sullivan, I'm more than happy, at a later date, to sit down with you and walk you through. I can do a school finance 101 so that I can bring you up to speed and all this stuff as best I can. Be happy to do that.
No, I have a pretty good understanding of it, so I don't have a whole ton of questions. The circuit breaker is always a question for me, and then the athletic piece, I don't deal with that ever at all. So, but we can sit down certainly another time. I agree. That'd be great.
And since Malaya and Dan brought this up, also Jeff, Dan, you should talk with Jeff about warrant training, right? In terms of because we'll need to sign the warrants.
Yes. Thank you. Yep.
So should we talk about school choice?
School choice, again, we brought forward into 21, 372,000 and change. Excuse me. And the intent for the 21 budget was that we were going to use school choice as an offset, and by that I mean to reallocate expenditures, the health insurance. I eat my soup too fast. I apologize. We were looking to use school choice as an offset to reduce the hit to the general fund for 21. The goal this year, and again, I've got another document I can put up here. The goal this year is to bring forward into 22 a value of almost $700,000. So where'd that number come from? Right now, in school choice, as you can see, we've spent $8,700, and there's an encumbrance of almost $3,600. There's an unencumbered balance of $562. DESE, every year, they do make an adjustment based upon reporting from districts in December in terms of our monthly disbursements. So right now, we're looking at approximately 321,000 in change as total receipts for FY21. Again, that's a projection based upon payments to date, and also projected payments for the balance of the year. It's our goal for 22 to hold on to all of our school choice. So there's 8,700, and again, I'd have to go into the detail here. But we would back that out of the general fund, out of this and into the general fund. This encumbrance, again, I don't have the detail to the encumbrance, but we can certainly liquidate that purchase order and reallocate it back to the general fund, and that would free up that 12,000 and change. So between this carry forward and this year's estimated receipts, that gets us close to the almost 700,000. And with school choice, you have tremendous flexibility as to how you can use those dollars. Short of school construction, You know, you can use them for essentially instruction and payroll and benefits as well. And historically, the district has used school choice to offset the insurances across the district. So again, not knowing the detail here, if I were a betting man, Deputy Superintendent Burlow typically would use school choice as the account to process any COVID-related cost until a grant was received. We'll make an adjustment there. We can certainly change this encumbrance here, free up the cash, and just continue to build the balance in this account for 22. And then the question becomes, you know, of that almost 700,000, you know, what do we use to help us with 22? And I have Daryl and I and Deputy Burlow have talked about that today. And again, our goal is to use a sum of that money to help us reduce our number for 22. Did I miss anything, Daryl?
So we'll open it up in a second. So a sum of, so in the budget book you have 250, right? Is what you put, and we'll have 700. And I know we don't want to create a structural deficit. Is my term for the day for you, Daryl, for the week of putting it all in, because then you have nothing for next year. But what are you, what, you know, it's just Monday, right, that we're going to hear about this. So from 250 to what? Like, what are you thinking of doing in the carry forward? What's your feeling?
I mean, potentially 350 or 400. I mean, we don't want to wipe it out entirely because in essence, school choice is your non-rainy day fund, where you know, if there's a hiccup of some sort, you know, we can do a purchase order, you know, now and charge off the school choice and address that hiccup, you know, whatever it might be. You know, with circuit breaker, if there's any type of a sped related hiccup, not a problem. But you know, circuit breaker is restricted to any and all special education related expenditures. You know, you can't use that obviously for textbooks. It's probably not a good example, but just the one that comes to my mind at this point in time.
So between school choice and circuit breaker, and I'm not like locking you into a number, but what I'm hearing you say is that it'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of $750,000 more dollars or more. I was hearing conservative Dan perhaps talking, and Daryl might push him a little bit there.
Yeah, I pushed in. Yes.
So more that we would use to reduce. Now, you know, Daryl and Dan have heard this from me a bunch of times, and I know it's just the way that finance works. It is a little bit to the people who are just looking at what's happening. I wouldn't say it's super transparent. I mean, it's. I know it's the way it goes, but like, you know, we're taking expenses away, right? But when we change this, rather than just adding revenue to what the layperson will see when it's an offset, which, and I appreciate that the offsets are in the budget book now. I mean, that's a good step. It's still a little bit confusing, I think, to the person who hasn't really thought about it, or even to the people who have, when you say, okay, you know, we found new revenue. So what we're actually doing is reducing expenses by, it's confusing, right? And it makes it hard from a year-over-year basis to see where we're actually spending our money. Because if we take if we remove, you know, salaries one year and pay for them with offsets, and then next year we pay for insurance or textbooks, we could be making large swings in what we're spending our money on, but it's not really apparent in our budget, or the budget can be slightly misleading, right? Because those lines aren't appearing as expenses to the general fund. So it's just, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. It's just confusing to someone who is just looking at it and being like, okay, tell me how salaries changed. Well, now I'm charging $500,000 this year to an offset that I didn't last year. Salaries look flat, but really we're spending $500,000 more. I mean, I'm just, making up numbers there, right? And it's a little hard to follow a year over year progression. And I'm not criticizing, I'm just observing, right?
So, and if I can just jump in, Ken, for a second, and I hear you, I do, I heard folks last year, and talking to Darryl, back in the late fall, winter, and when we were looking to set up the line item budget, one thing that we did put in this year, which I thought, and maybe I'm too close to the stuff, that it works for me, but from afar maybe it doesn't work, and so I appreciate the criticism. Is we included an offset column in there. What's not in the budget book, and I hate to say it, it's not in the budget book because we couldn't fit the space in there. Is a notes column. If you look at the actual line item budget, there is a notes column, and it tells you what the offset is. And
I appreciate that, and if we want to do the work, and I do, and I see that it's there. I'm just saying, like, for instance, in the presentation to the towns, when it's just a PowerPoint, right? And it's just that top level PowerPoint. It's just tough, and it's just, it has how it has to be. But I just think we want to just explain it year after year about, here's the offsets, here's where they're going, because not everyone's going to, they'll ask for the line item budget, but they won't drill down into it, right? So, and that's not your fault per se. It's just, we want to make sure we're being clear about how things are changing.
And Ken, I think Dan's done a great job pulling together the offsets. I mean, I took a look at like we said yesterday, we were talking about some of the stuff that Northborough, Southborough has done, and they have a pretty extensive booklet that they also put out, and they have a one-pager offsets, and it's real quick, 5 or 6 lines, but it doesn't necessarily go into detail. So I think what we can do is we can be a little more transparent about kind of trying to tie it back. But like you said, the hard part is for those people who look at it over time, they're like, so like you just said, so you used it to offset salaries last year, but now you're using it to offset, something in instructional support over here this year. And that's where it becomes a little more confusing. And again, it's something that all districts do, because everybody gets circuit breaker in some form or fashion. Regional transportation comes back, so you get, that gets thrown in there a little bit if you have the carryover from year to year with your transportation account. So,
and for school choice, I'm sorry, I'm chair of this committee. I shouldn't be talking so much, but in terms of school choice going forward, you're going to have to take your committee by the hand and make us realize that this money is going down every year, and we're counting on it. And particularly if enrollment doesn't come back up, we're going to have tough conversations about, the fact that either we need to have school choice, or we need to realize that we need to offset expenses every year to make up for the loss in revenue. That it's just choices we're making.
I agree.
Yeah, school choice, you're gonna have to be very careful with the use of those dollars, because for the points you just said a second ago, no question about that. No question about that.
Now that I rambled on, other members of the committee want to ask questions.
I have another side to what you just said, Ken, and I understand this, but I get questions from people concerned about special education, and I don't know if Christine's on the call. I don't think she is. When they see things like our 4.5 sped related staffing cuts this year, and that we then have a balance in some areas of our budget that could fund special education funds. Those two things do not make sense to them. And so that we need to be explaining, because we can tell them it doesn't impact things. But I mean, when people lose sped teachers and a speech language person, and even the staff in central office, and then they see that we have a balance in some of these lines, even though we use it for other things, that doesn't resonate with them. They don't really understand that. And some days I don't, although I do, because I see all of the different pieces and how we actually use it. But it on paper, it does not make sense. It's not transparent to people. and they see that money and say, well, why isn't it going towards special education? Or when we do get SOA funds, if we do get them, why are they not going to go? Why are we still going to have probably some of these cuts in place? So just questions that I get from people. And I wish Christine was here. She could perhaps enlighten us. But since we're talking about the nuts and bolts of the budget on this level, it's directly relevant. Since last year, of the staff that wasn't restored, 4.5 positions were SPED related. And here we have a quite sizable balance. We're using it, but it doesn't look good on paper and people are asking. So we need to be able to explain that. Honestly, I don't have good answers for them because I am not Christine or central office. But it's questionable at best if you're one of the families depending on those services to know why we have funds in those lines and we're not spending them on those purposes. So if we could illuminate that, that would be great.
Anything else, if I may, Ken, with school choice or circuit breaker, the two big ticket items, for lack of a better term?
Sure. And just in terms of offset, I know we already talked about lunch, but in the budget book, you have $150,000 offset from school lunch.
Yes.
But this year is operating in a deficit. So, yes.
So what we would do, and again, the method to my madness, if you will, is that come next school year, there will be hopefully some more normalcy, if you will. I mean, maybe the year we start out in hybrid, and again, or maybe not. Maybe maybe come the end of August, September, where we're back in at 100%. The premise is that we would use 150,000 of her receipts next year to offset the health insurance cost for her staff. And that is just going back to past practice. We didn't do it this year, obviously, because she doesn't have the money. And that typically, that type of an adjustment would not be made until mid-year or into the third quarter of next year, when we have a much better sense in terms of what her revenues are going to be looking like for FY22. And if we're not able to make that adjustment, then we would have to look at where we're at in the general fund, and potentially, if we have to make a transfer into benefits in the fourth quarter of 22, then we would do that to make benefits whole.
But in a 2 years ago world, that's a typical amount.
Yes, it is. Yep. Yeah. Yes, it is. Yep.
So, Dan, I had a question on the topic of offsets. And this, I kind of at least somewhat alluded to it last weekend, or not last weekend, last meeting. And it was just trying to get the kind of the consistent year-over-year use of offsets and kind of the rough amount. And so part of the reason that I can, at least maybe that like the district has a track record of doing it, is that it's a way of cushioning the blow when we throw out the big number. So like this year, for this upcoming year, we throw out that it's a $106 million budget, but it's really about 111 million because that 106 number had the offsets cooked into it. So the year that we're in right now, the number that everyone looks at, it's 102. But how much was it how much was it really? Was it like, and the reason I'm getting at is that if it's something that there's always been a consistent about 5 million, kind of maybe 4.9 the year before. And so I get it, because it's at some point a decision was made to do it that way, so that when we throw out the number for how much our budget is, it makes it a little bit less. So it makes it so it's not, there's a little bit less of a shock. But when we, like for the year that we're in, when we say that our budget is 102 million, it doesn't. That's not quite an accurate representation of what it costs to run our district.
And Kyle, to your point, that's what I attempted to show in 22, that here's what it costs to run the district, $112 million, and then we have these other funds, and these other funds, and again, we'll just stay with circuit breaker and school choice because that's what we're talking about. These other funds help us to reduce the total operating budget by X millions of dollars, $3 million, so that the net is $108 million. But I think what I am looking to do is to have people focus on the bigger numbers, that here's your real number. That's what it costs to run this place. And and we've got circuit breaker over here. We've got every year we get $2 million, and we get school choice, and that number's going down every year. And this year it's $320,000. That was the goal. And to your question, what was the real number for this year? I mean, I'd have to back into that. We'd have to look at total circuit breaker. What we did use, we built the 21 budget on the premise that we would use school choice, but now our goal is not to touch anything in school choice, so that'll help us in 22.
And again, it's at least having that information, at least for the current year that we're in, it's helpful to be able to make a more realistic comparison. Because say the number this year is 107 instead of 102, then sure, you can say, okay, we're going from 107 to 112, and then we can talk about some of these offsets that we kind of have coming in, at least to be able to talk some of that and say we've consistently been getting like 4 to 5 million through circuit breaker, school choice, and all that we've been using as offsets. And that's kind of, you can at least be able to talk that it's been kind of consistent practice, but we at least want to show that like the cost to run the district is this, but the way that the numbers get. Because again, if someone now says, oh, well, we were at 102 last year and now we're jumping up to 111, why are we spending $9 million more dollars? We're not really spending $9 million more dollars. It was just the way that we did our accounting, like with the use of offset. So it doesn't look like our budget's jumping up by 9-10 million.
Right. It wasn't represented. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's just what I'm saying, is that at least being able to talk through that, to say that it's being represented in different ways, that it can, again, it just can show these kind of the different changes in how we've always kind of used some of these revolving funds and whatnot. So that was kind of what I was getting at with that.
Yep. I'm sorry,
So hopefully
I can't see you with the screen here, so I didn't know you were there. Hi, how are you? Sorry about that.
Yeah, hopefully with our next item in our agenda, there'll be other good news. So our next item was general fund revenues and expenditures, right? So
all right, so I am going to close this out, and I'm going to jump into something else, if I may, and just tell me that you're seeing it when I put it up here in a second.
we're seeing an Excel file.
Okay, all right. So, and I'm gonna jump into the Excel document again, as I wrote in my report. You've got a munis report, but then what I do is I convert it to Excel to do some projections. And how's that? Can you see it? Okay. We
Yes.
good? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, the assessments to the towns, pretty straightforward. But I'm going to jump down to the state aid and local revenues. And as I had stated in previous meetings, our FY21 Chapter 70, there's an almost $409,000 variance from Wachusett's approved budget of March 2020. Again, the state budget was approved in December of 2020, so 9 months later, and we've talked about that. Regional transportation. So I have made a change, and the reason for the change, in our previous discussions, I had shown you the 135,000 repayment that the DESI still needs to take. That goes back 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when prior to my arrival, and that was the issue that I walked in on the end of the year report, and the overpayment of approximately $270,000 to the district. In the FY22 state budget, regional transportation is in there at approximately 1.6 million. There's almost $800,000 shift from Wachusett's approved FY21 budget. As I said earlier in the meeting, I've had several discussions with Jay Sullivan, and he has confirmed for me that we will see additional revenue for FY21 when I process the amendment, and again, due to the payment to AA Transportation. He, as I said earlier, he won't tell me what that number is, nor would he tell me what our disbursement would be exclusive of the amendment. So what I've done is that I'm estimating our regional transportation receipts at, as you can see the notes here, at almost 1.7, 1,670,602. Where's that number come from? I'm using that from the FY22 cherry sheet, and that's 800,000, pretty much less than what was in the 21 budget. I then added another 200,000 to that, and again, that's just an estimate of the additional revenue that we may receive with my EOR amendment, and that's an estimate. That's an estimate. So our new number is almost 1.9, $1,870,602 for FY21. And then I backed out the balance owed. Again, the DESI did not take this money last year, so they'll take it this year, of approximately 135,000. That's the repayment, again, going back a couple years ago. So that's the genesis to the 1.7. And where I'm showing an almost $700,000 variance between our approved budget for FY21. Charter reimbursement. When the state budget was finally approved at the end of December, we saw a bump in our reimbursements, and our revenues to date here do reflect this 214,000 figure. So I'm running with that in terms of FY21, that we'll see that number based upon receipts to date. Medicaid, I'm not changing the projections in terms of Medicaid, but I do want to point out that our estimated payment later on this month, again, the key word there is estimated, is approximately 90,000 and change that we would receive. So we're getting close to the benchmark, and also too, I am hopeful to know by the end of the month what our cost report payment's going to be in June. And the cost report for FY20 is typically the big payment each and every year. It has not been the case, as the committee knows, the past several years, but we have made numerous strides for the good, and certainly as the committee knows, hiring our Medicaid coordinator, Sue Soper, is the first big step that we took a year and a half ago to right the Medicaid ship. I have reduced our interest. Unfortunately, this year, unlike the past 2 years, our interest income is down. For the past 2 years, Jim Dunbar did great work. This is just the market being what it is. So we're estimating a reduction there of 25,000. Also, miscellaneous revenue, I've reduced that by approximately 125,000. And again, we've got 6,000 in the bank, which is nothing, quite frankly. And again, the big money driver there would be the reimbursements that we would be receiving from other districts across the Commonwealth for sped transportation to Devereux out in Rutland. So that's again just indicative of the times that we are in. But in terms of the revenues, so I'm looking at an almost 1.1 million gap, a little bit under 1.1 on the revenue side, and estimating our revenues at $101 million. On the expense side, and I'm going to get to the expense side in a second. I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but I'm estimating that our total expenditures will be 99.7 million for FY21, and that's an estimate. This moment in time, and that estimate, I every day now I sharpen my pencil each and every day to refine that figure. We're at that point now where we need to refine the figure. That being said, I'm projecting that we would have almost 1.3 million available on our bottom line that would go into E&D. I also made an assumption on note 6 here, and you'll see this when we do the review the expenditures, that where we are doing a transfer into transportation stabilization of about $350,000. And again, that's Dan Deedy, for lack of a better term, making an executive decision, trying to make this work. I welcome additional conversation with the committee about that. Want to jump ahead for a second to this next slide. And the one difference here is in miscellaneous. So why did we go from estimated at 75,000 to 187,000? And that is because, and again, I'll get to this. So I grab my notes. I apologize. But that is because at about 3 o'clock this afternoon, I received a written confirmation from FEMA, and I can put that up here if you'd like, that our application has been reviewed and completed. And they did make some adjustments of approximately 18,000 and change, which I'm not challenging, but that we will receive, and I have it here in black and white, that we will receive a reimbursement of $112,359.73. And I'm going to talk about that when I get to the FEMA discussion. But that's why I bumped up the miscellaneous, because that money will be credited to miscellaneous. That being the case, our projected balance that would be going towards E&D would be 1.4. I would be happy to answer any questions on the revenue side before we get into the expenditures.
I mean, before too long, before people's brains start to melt a little on this, which we need to go into details, but it's been a little over 2 hours. The take home message, and Daryl, if I don't know if he's still there or not, but might have some input into this as well, is that 1.3, 1.4, you're going to put 350 of that into a revolving account carry forward. Fine, you're still talking $900,000, $1 million, right? We've got 1.4 certified in E&D now, right? But we only put 300 towards E&D in the budget book. So what is administration thinking with regards to either putting more of this balance towards offsets or using an E&D as a revenue source for Monday night? Like where are y'all?
So I'll jump on that. I apologize, Daryl, if I cut you off the path. We are committed to using both the balance in transportation and allocate that to transportation to reduce the transportation assessment. I mean, we've done that now. I think Ken, if I remember from early in FY 21, maybe July or August, in discussions with the committee and when Chair Dennis was here, that I think if we could have, we would have moved more money into transportation stabilization aside from the $150 that was voted. I heard the message. That's what we're working towards, is to take a minimum of 350, if not more, and bring it forward. That would be a recommendation that administration would bring to this committee and seek your support for the full committee, and take a vote perhaps sooner than later. Then secondly, in terms of E&D, again, if these numbers hold and their projections, looking at 1.3, 1.4. Again, I took a leap of faith a little bit by factoring in the reimbursement from FEMA, but I've got it here in black and white. It's just a question of when is it going to show up, and I got to believe we're going to see it before June 30. But more importantly, is that that will help us. I have until actually September 30 to receive that revenue for this year, which would help us in 22. So again, it could be 1.4 on our bottom line, that could be potentially certified for FY 21 certified value that'll help us in 22. Excuse me. What I need to do still is got to look at any and all revolving accounts where there might be any gaps and plug those gaps so that the revolvings are whole. Excuse me. My voice is running out here a little bit.
Well, so Dan,
So Daryl, what would the range be then? What would the range be?
it's going to be between 800 and $1 million. So
Okay, that's kind of what I was looking for. Yeah.
Yeah.
So between the carry forward, which would reduce the budget, or whatever we want to call them, and the E&D, which is different because the budget is still what it is, but we're providing more revenue to pay the budget. And because remember, the towns vote on the budget and the appropriation, right? So that's the difference between how we bring money forward too, right? So we're talking about from the presentation that you showed us yesterday to the presentation we'll see on Monday. No promises. I don't, Dan. I'll give you all the wibble you want, but we're starting to get into like close to $2 million of offsets and more E&D.
Ken, we're looking.
Yeah.
The state is right now, given the governor's budget, the state is down 923,000 and change. Where in essence, as Daryl said a second ago, what we're looking to do is backfill that between 800 to almost $1 million. We acknowledge that. That's what we're trying to do.
You're on mute, Ken.
Compared to yesterday's presentation, we're going to be less conservative to
Yes.
the tune of probably $1.5 million or so in offsets and E&D. Probably.
I assume that you can see my camera, and
Yeah, there's pencils. Yeah, we sharpened pencils. Yes, but
and Ken, I can just jump in real quick. So yes, we're looking at, because again, Dan he's more conservative than I am with with these things. So I've pushed him with excess and deficiency, as well as looking at any other ways in which we could kind of tap into some money to kind of give us the 1.1, 1.2, somewhere in that range, so we can bring that budget down, ultimately, and offset assessments, whatever we want to do. But it puts us in a place where we're at a lower percentage overall, also for the communities. So right now we're at 3.82, and it's we've heard from I've heard from 3 of the 5 communities that it's not doable for them. So it's not a tenable number. So you have talked to a couple of select board members over the past week, and they're really straightforward with me. I know all these people, and they're just basically saying, hey, this is a tough year to do anything like this. It's a really tough year. So I hear them, heard them, and we're going to bring this down to a number that still will allow us to do what we need to do, but it's a little more reasonable. And Dan has been very good, and I'm going to give him all the credit in the world for when he did come in here. We didn't carry a lot of money over from year to year, so we always use the offsets, but the concern is always around, okay, if we do have something go wrong that we need to take care of, or we have some issues associated with insurance or 9C cuts, again, those could happen at any time. We don't have a backup.
So do other members want to ask questions at this point before Dan moves forward? All right, so Dan, what's next?
This is the expense side, and again, these are projected expenditures. Excuse me, I ate too fast at 6:30 tonight. I apologize. And again, just very quickly, I'm just being sensitive to the hour here for people. Here's the undesignated, which we've been talking about all night. This is where we charge off any and all COVID-related expenditures. Year to date, we're looking at 247,000, that we have spent. We're estimating another 150,000 in expenditures between now and the end of the year, so we'd be short there almost 400,000. Food service, again, depending upon what happens with Margaret, but I bumped it up to 120,000. Day-to-day subs, this is the value remaining in the line, so we're looking at almost 200,000. The nurse manager, that's still a vacancy that we're looking to backfill. This actually, it would be less than that 45,000. This is a number that I've been carrying forward since January. We're into March now, so it'd be a little bit less than that, but I'm using that as a bigger number. Spring coaches have not been encumbered yet, so I'm using 50,000. Here's a transfer into benefits. Again, we're not using school choice or any other revolving to offset the cost, so that's why there's a deficit in benefits. Other adjustments. Again, if there are any shortfalls in revolving accounts, we would make those whole and transfer the charge to the general fund. Long-term subs, again, that's the balance remaining there. I'm making an assumption that we're going to spend that money. There are still some other groups where contracts are being settled, and that's not an exact figure. I don't want to give it away, but there's money allocated to address those. This is something that we've talked about, other operating costs. Again, when the final state budget figures were approved in late December, there was a gap between the final state budget number and the approved Wachusett number of almost 700,000. So that's where that's going. Here's athletic revolving. Again, We talked about that. That's her shortfall is about 41,000. I bumped it up to 50, just to give a little bit of wiggle room. So looking at almost 2.5 in estimated expenditures, leaving a balance there of a little bit over $1 million. And then benefits and insurance, again, we're short there. We add 800,000. You have a balance of 64,000. Instructional support, there's an assumption we're going to spend it all down, so there'll be nothing left over. Operations and maintenance. I do want to point out that here the encumbrance of 1.6 for utilities and for fuel, that number is good. We're going to need to drill down on that number and have get better refinement of what is available in there. So right now we're estimating 60,000 in expenditures for a balance of about almost 62,000. Pupil services, we've carried forward this 9,100 for a while, and so we're assuming that we're going to have a balance there at the end of the year, that we won't be spending any more there. Sped tuitions, again, we would spend it down and free up cash in circuit breaker to bring that forward. And then other operating costs, again, this is just the adjustment from the final state budget where we're in the hole because of the Wachusett budget being approved in March of 2020 and the state budget being approved in December of 2020, and there's a variance. And then here's the 350 that I'm estimating. And again, this number may change. Could be more. Again, Daryl and I are working on that. But here's this expenditure, because everything else is encumbered. We may need to add another van or two. And again, that was talked about last night. But here's the balance here. So between what's been totally spent to date and what we're estimating, we're looking at 99.7, almost 99.8 million. I apologize. I went through that fast. I'm just being sensitive to the time. Not that this is not important. It is. I'd be happy to answer any questions for sure.
So at the end of the day, some of this savings was because we have less people hired this year in total than we anticipated. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yep.
Okay. So why don't we, the next item on our agenda, because this is all kind of linked, right? All these items, I'm just going to the agenda, is to talk about the final cherry sheet. I assume that'll probably be a brief.
It'll be. Well, I think I've spoken about that already in looking at the revenues. I mean, we've talked about Chapter 70, the charter reimbursement, and regional transportation. I just want to say again, for regional transportation, the final cherry sheet number, there was a nominal bump between the Wachusett approved budget and the state approved budget. But again, I reduced that because I'm not a betting man in terms of the cherry sheet number for regional transportation. So I reduced it, as I discussed, reflecting the FY22 initial state budget number. So there could be some additional cash there if indeed the number is anywhere close to this 2.4. That's a quick overview of the cherry sheet.
Yeah, we've kind of talked about all the parts of the cherry sheet already throughout the night. So
we have.
Do people have questions to this point? The next item was the FEMA, and good work definitely on pulling that together. You gave us the take-home message of that already. Is there anything else you want to talk about with that? Because it's good work. We appreciate it.
It's right here, Ken. You can see it. There was almost 17,000 that wasn't eligible. I'm not going to contest it. I'm not. I want my $112,000, and so we'll be in this. So just to point out too is that It's now at 100% reimbursement as opposed to 75%. So we'll be getting 112,000. I did reach out to my rep. Again, I have a FEMA rep. I haven't heard back from him. He and I went back and forth today, but in my last communication, my question was, so when do I get the check? And I have not heard back from him regarding that. But here is the payments, and this document here. This is their analysis of my claim. But this is the important stuff right here. 112,000.
Do people have questions towards that?
And just want to make a comment. I am submitting a second application, and I'm not expecting to see it be completed in this fiscal year, but I want to get the ball rolling regarding the second application with FEMA.
So our next item, we've talked about a little bit in bits and pieces throughout the night in terms of feedback from last night and plans for how you might bring forward a document to us that's different. I want to talk less, but I just want to set the stage to remind people, and I'm sure you all know, that there's two things we have to send to the town, right? We send the budget to the town and we send the appropriations to the town. We can't move the budget up if we get more revenue, right? We can lower the appropriations on the floor, I suppose, right? If, as I would anticipate, the House 1 budget comes in higher for Chapter 70, whether that's through recalculating, not hold harmless, but recalculating based on fiscal year 19 October 1 counts, which I know has been thrown out there, or just increases in Chapter 70, which is also possible, or as long as it's not tied to just urbans and low income, and possibly regional transportation reimbursement going up either through our revised claim, our revised EOR, or more likely through the House being a little bit more generous in the reimbursement estimation rate than the governor's budget was. So, that's something that we can't promise to the towns, right? But if we pass a budget that seems a little expensive, by the time May 17th comes around, it might be a little less expensive. So in terms of what we heard last night, we've already hearing a good increase in revenue, right? What feedback do people have and what they'd like to see differently, aside from increase in E&D and increase in use and offsets for what we're going to see on Monday night? What's our reflections on last night and other feedback?
So
what does administration want feedback on? Let's put it that way.
So
you heard things last night, yeah.
I guess what I'd like to leave with the committee, with Daryl and myself and Deputy Burlow talking about today and yesterday, is that where I put my pencil down, but we have sharpened our pencil. Daryl gave you a range as to where we're going to go to make this work. And as I said a moment ago, the range that Daryl spoke to a second ago is in essence reflective of the adjustment in the initial state budget for 22. And that's what we build our 22 budget on, are those numbers, because that is what it is. So I'm committed by Friday to drilling down, to going through a couple of these here, if you can see it or not, to get the budget to where it'll be, I hope, supported by the full committee in the towns.
And most of the pencil sharpening so far is on revenue, right, rather than on expense. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
So, I mean, I'll go ahead and I'll throw out one thing at least. I think that certainly I think there'll be questions on the details, but I think at least at a higher level, to be able to say we've moved into a range where we're looking at assessments to towns that are an increase of kind of the number that you've gotten to, and then being able to talk, what does that mean that next year will look like compared with this year? And then even to a degree, what Ken had mentioned at the meeting yesterday, kind of where things were from initially this year. So like the three parts that were kind of to a degree in the presentation of what 22 would look like, kind of how that's varied from where we are right now, but then also some of the things that we started off talking for 21 that have since been cut. So it kind of will at least show like where we started at 21, where we cut to, and then where's 22 ending. So I think even there certainly will be more questions into the details, but at least I think at a high level that people would want to see something along those lines.
I think that follows from what I was hearing from Malay, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but some of the reductions in special ed lines, and then we're adding in counselors, just some sort of narrative, I think, of why do we choose to make the reductions we made, which resulted in this, I won't call it a surplus, but resulted in this money we can carry forward, right? And then we made choices to add other things that were appropriate at the time, be it building subs, be it tech people because of the switch to remote learning. And now this is what we're looking to do next year. I think that adding that back bit of the story is important narrative. It may be that I have no idea. It may be that special education positions were removed because students who needed those services left the district, or maybe that you made a curricular decision that we maybe should have heard about with regards to the way services are delivered. I don't know what the answer is there, but I think that story.
I really wish Christine were here tonight, because that has come to my attention this week because people have started paying attention and asking. So, yeah. Good.
But the way Carl phrased it, I think, is really good. Just to think about, where did we think we were going to be? Yeah. Where actually are we? And how do you want to move us forward in terms of, staffing, but big picture other items, in terms of, we're going to need to spend more next year than we anticipated this year on operations and maintenance, because we have to anticipate COVID expenses next year that may or may not be reimbursed. Like just some, I think Carl put it really well. So I'll stop talking.
Yeah, again, I think those are good points, Carl, in terms of how to kind of lay it out. So, really looking at what we were anticipating for 21, what the actuals were for 21, now what we're anticipating for 22, in terms of the staffing, requirements, and what we've looked at. Malay, in terms of the special ed ones, I know those were positions. Some of those positions, I believe, were directly related to overstaffing. Like we didn't need the staffing in those particular places.
That's good.
So it wasn't a.
Well, I'm just saying that needs to be that sort of thing, as Ken said, really needs to be in the situation we're in right now. In this budget year, I think that level of detail kind of needs to be explained to people.
Yeah. So whenever we look at anything associated with special education, and
any of the positions, not just those. That's just.
Oh no, I hear you, but particularly with special education, because of our obligation to fulfill IEP requirements, and what we need to do. I've been doing this up here since 2007. In terms of the special ed piece, and we always take a look at, if there are places, and we do this with all positions, but if there are places where we can consolidate, where we have a full-time speech and language person and 3 assistants in a building, that's too much. So what we do is, consolidate your schedules, look at pulling some things together, look at it a little differently. That's what we do, and we do that every year. It just doesn't necessarily get played out in that way.
No, I didn't mean to focus just on those. They jumped out. But in general, I think we need to explain that level of detail, because people are trying to figure this out with us, and they're looking very closely. And honestly, a lot of people I'm hearing from are not really anxious to approve our budget this year. We have very little goodwill in the community this year, I think, which is unfortunate. But because of a lot of things about this year, we are starting at the bottom of a hill, not the top of the hill or anywhere even halfway up the hill. And so I think anything we can do to explain in very much detail why we made certain choices. And also, I know one of the things we mentioned last night was lacking was some of the actual financial details about the implications of certain choices, whether that's certain positions and position X cost this much and position Y cost this much, or some of the other budget items like the testing and how much is that going to cost in our budget next year, and how much is this, some of it we don't know and won't know by Monday, but
Right.
we really don't even have an estimate on a lot of those things. And I think we need to be able to explain in more detail. I remember it was a long time ago now, but the last time there was a budget, I'll call it, it's not really crisis, but the budget situation was 7 or 8 years ago. I remember watching school committee meetings at the time, and there was a lot of detail, right down to this position at this school is costing this much, and we think that's the one we're going to get rid of versus this other one. And there was a lot of detail provided to even the public to see.
So, and Malaya, those were based upon and I talked about this a little bit last night. We used to do scenarios, scenario A,
Right.
scenario B, scenario C, and we were really specific. Here's what we get with scenario A, here's B, here's C. And then if you go back to what we did in the spring, that's exactly what we did. And I gave you specific.
Right. But I'm looking at this moment in time.
Yep.
I think when we're talking about the level that we've, staffing and other items in the budget and what choices we're making, we need to not only give them the big picture, but really some of the detail. Maybe not this week, but at some point, I think we do need to be prepared to provide or discuss that level of detail, because people are wanting to know what they really don't want to be paying a lot for the school budget this year, the towns or the community members that I'm hearing from, at least. And I think we need to give them as much information as possible to explain the choices we're making and why, and what the impacts of them are, and not just our staffing budget is obviously this percentage and that's our biggest percentage, but we need to really explain why and which positions. And that's just my personal opinion from what I've been hearing, that I think people are, I think it's an uphill discussion right now. And I think the more information we give them to explain, the better.
Yeah.
It's just me. I'm just one of us, but.
And if we can try and set a budget that we hope by the time town meeting comes and the House puts out a budget, we have to base on the governor now because it is what it is, that, we can have minimal increases to the towns, hopefully, cross fingers, without then just using that as an excuse to increase the budget, I think would be good in this period of time.
Actually, that reminds me of another question. Sorry. Another point in talking about this, because it hasn't been done the past couple of years. I know we only talk about our piece of the budget, mostly in our assessments, but I think somewhere in the conversation, it would be useful just to take, a slide to explain that the other part of the town assessment, the minimum local contribution, comes from the state, and we have no control over that, because I know, for example, Holden's went up $1 million the past 2 years before we even touched our budget. And most members of the public do not understand that, because it's never been explained in that level of detail unless they're really into this stuff.
Yeah,
they just see budget going up and percentage of town budget going to schools, and they don't really understand the difference. So I think it may be useful to also make that point, that a piece of this is not really up to us. We can only talk in detail about our part, but there is a piece that increases that's not up to us.
Yeah, and we do that. So when I do the budget presentation to the 5 towns, that's a huge part of what we talk about, and they all understand it. And I understand you're talking.
Well, the FinComs do. The
FinComs
FinComs understand.
FinComs, the select boards,
citizens don't.
And I think, again, we've been doing this for a long time in terms of how that kind of plays out. what we could do is have, maybe something within the budget book that explains it. But it is in the budget book because part of it is, I think,
It is.
It's hard for I think it's hard for some people to grasp because it's the amount that you have to pay, and then we're asking for this much more above minimum
It is.
local
Yeah.
contribution.
I think it's in the budget book in text, but it's not a visual, and it's not really made. I don't know the best way to present it.
You know what? It's really hard to, because I've talked to other superintendents about how to do this. The state hasn't come up with a good way to show this either, Malaya.
No, I'm just indicating communication with the public. Who we need to support this, even if the FinComs totally understand. I understand that. And the people that work with the budget, but the public that essentially has to vote on this eventually, and just here's the town saying our assessment went up this much, doesn't really fully have the whole picture just from that statement, and we need to give them our piece of the picture and differentiate that.
You know what? I'm gonna have to go back through. I know DESE they've updated their and I don't know whether or not it's the district analysis review tool DART, but I think it is. There's actually some really good information in there, and I think there's actually a visual associated with MLC and the increase.
Yeah.
So let me go into that, Malaya, and I'll see if I can pull something out from that.
It's a mess this year. I mean, honestly, we know this. It's a mess, and then we have other things impacting ours. But just explaining the different pieces and how they're together, and why we have fewer students, but our fund assessments are still going up for some towns. We shouldn't have to explain that, but we do have to explain it to get their support.
Yeah.
And that is very hard. I mean, very hard to explain, but I think necessary.
And this isn't really budget related, but in your back pocket for meetings, and we do these presentations, there's definitely a narrative that we're surrounded by towns that are all back in school full time, which just isn't the case. In fact, we're surrounded by a major city that is not in person at all. So could we do better? Yes. Will we do better? Yes. But I do think we want to be able to respond to statements that come out as though every town around us was back full time, where maybe if you're comparing us to Texas, that's the case. We need to do better, no doubt. We need to get the kids back.
Yeah.
But in the back pocket, we might want to say, what are our surrounding towns and what are their in-school situations been through February, just to counter some of that narrative that's out there. And again, that's not saying any of the surrounding towns are right. We should definitely get back, but it's not like we're surrounded by places. Yeah, it's the narrative is out there.
We need to tell our side of the story and not let the 20 people that post on Facebook every day tell their side. We need to tell our side and not just let it be played out in the media, not just social media, but regular media too. I think this year in particular, we need to explain what we're doing and why and what.
So Monday night, what else might we want? What else might district? What else? What from last night? What else process do we want to talk about? What do we want to change for Monday?
So and again, for Jeff, I don't know if you've ever seen one of the budget hearings, but the budget hearings typically are just, I'll go through, I'll do the presentation in the same way that I've done it already, but typically we modify it based upon my conversations with the towns. Budget hearing happens. A couple of towns people show up, typically 1 or 2. I'm talking when we do the in-person. They give some feedback. And Ken, I'm trying to remember, there's typically not a lot of discussion at that time around the table.
The budget hearing is for the public.
Right.
We can talk about the budget, and this is up to Mike, of course, but the budget hearing is the public hearing. We can talk about it in the regular meeting. Right?
Regular meeting. Yeah, right.
Yeah, we're supposed to be listening at the hearing, not talking.
Right.
I have a logistical question about that. Do we have a process for the hearing? Are we planning to use something similar to what we use for our public comments?
Probably, yeah. So Barry and Mike are going to have to talk through that a little bit as well, because it's going to be probably a sign up, and you have the opportunity to jump into the meeting, say your piece. Okay, here's what I think about the budget, and then similar to what Bob Levine did, the select board member from Holden. So yeah, Go ahead.
And that's up to Mike and you and all to decide. I mean, historically, there's probably good value into having public comment after your presentation, right? So people can respond to what you've said rather than necessarily to respond to what they heard last week. I don't know, or both, whatever.
Yeah, and I'm trying to recall. I think we have had one or two members who have done the second, not members, but community members who have stayed through the meeting, and then they said their statements at the end after I had done my presentation on the hearing. So I could see that being the case as well, because they can still sign up during that time. But yeah, I appreciate all the conversation we had last night around the information that we shared with you in reference to the priorities that people had talked about. This afternoon I think we had 11 people who had filled it out thus far. So I was going to talk to Barry a little bit more before we pull the information and maybe shoot one more thing out. Hey, got one more, give him a little more time. But for that evening, as Dan mentioned, we spent much of the afternoon looking at the budget and looking at how we can really it's lower the assessments. That's what it comes down to. So when I have my conversations with town managers, with select board members, they're looking at what that increase is. A 1.7 million is so different than a 2.7 million for a community like Holden. Makes a big difference ultimately. And we heard that from Bob Levine last night. Their capacity to fulfill their obligations to the rest of the community. And what we have to remember is, we're here to ensure that we can provide a solid education for our kids and, support through staffing and everything like that. So it is a balancing act. Dan is very conscientious when it comes to paying attention to the funds that we might be looking for the future. So that's a concern. And again, we have to plan out a little bit. I think we're still in we do have 100 more students now than we did for our October 1 number. I mentioned that last night. So we were down about 400. We're now down about 300 because kids have come back. And once we send that survey out to see if we find some more information around people who have left and if they're coming back, that will help us kind of form our ideas about what we might be looking for FY23 and FY24. So I'm trying to plan this out so it's not just 1 year to another. Yes, we have to get a budget passed, but we also need to think about kind of these long-term effects. And Ken is very good about making sure that we don't set up structural deficits where we're adding staff and so forth, and we're using one-time monies to pay for things, and then we don't have those funds the following year. That is a very real concern for me, especially with grant money coming in. So, like I showed last night, gosh, we've spent $1.5 million on all these different things. Out of one grant, out of 130 on another, we purchased a lot of Chromebooks. We have a lot of things that we know will help us moving into next year and the year after. But we just have to pay attention to those one-time costs that we're covering right now with grants and other things that we're not going to have 2-3 years down the road.
Yeah, the questionnaire did not have a box I wanted to check, which was don't spend any more money. That wasn't one of the options on the thing, and I was looking for it.
It just no money, 0%. Yeah, we had a couple of years ago, we had a select board member in one of the communities just say, Daryl, we want a 0% increase from you. That's it, 0% for the school district. And that was a fun conversation that night.
Oh, I had a question. I think I asked Dan this in an email, so I'm sorry. I forget the answer. Did the assessments that you already gave us, did they include the adjustments from the ESSER funds? I can't talk anymore.
Yes.
You know what I'm asking?
Yes. I did
Can we
reduce.
make that clear also? Because although that's a state decision, I think we do need to reflect that this is what your assessment was, but this is what the state allowed you to do, so it's lower. That only affects a couple of our towns, I think. But I think it's a useful illustration, particularly Holden, since that is the largest assessment and the one with the largest increase, I think.
Yeah, Holden.
To at least spell out how much that was and how much it's already been adjusted would be also helpful.
You know what? And we'll do that, Dan. That's a good one. We might want to add a slide, update one of the slides for the presentation on Monday evening. We won't do it for the town. I can talk through that with the towns, which we've done 2 towns already, but
clearly illustrating that would also be helpful because, I mean, that's double-edged sword because we lose the money in one column, but it offsets the towns in another. So
yeah, Dan has a really nice spreadsheet with it, so we can just cut and paste that right in. And look, I bet you he's going to show it right now.
There you go.
Great. Wow.
So for Holden, it's oh, I think I'm muted.
No, I can hear you.
It's 200. It's almost 210,000. I guess round numbers 209,657.
I mean, I don't know if they need this level of spreadsheet data, but
no,
just the bottom line of it would be helpful to illustrate how much or what percentage or however you want to indicate that, because that's a big chunk of money.
Oh, it is. We're going down from 680, I believe, down to 335. And that money is just going right back to the town. So.
And as I said, it's a double-edged sword because we don't have the money in one bucket that affects our budget, but in the other thing, it does lower their assessment.
Yep.
And I think we need to illustrate that.
Yep, that's a good point, Malia. I think, yeah, we'll do that. That's a really good point.
So unless there's anything else, I will take a motion to approve the minutes. Actually, can I do these by, I liked Mike's thing.
Yeah, me too.
So unless I hear an objection by unanimous consent, we'll approve the minutes of the February 1st meeting. Hearing no objection, those minutes are approved by unanimous consent. Next meeting, let's not talk about that tonight. Why don't Daryl, why don't you and Dan talk about when it would be most useful to you for us to meet again, and then
reach out
and Randy can reach out to members and see when we'd want to meet.
Sure, that sounds good.
Yeah, and you have 2 more budget hearings tonight or this week, right? Or meetings with the towns, not hearings, meetings with the towns.
We have 2 tomorrow night.
Holden, I know.
And then we have
Sterling.
Holden Sterling tomorrow night, and then Rutland on Thursday night.
All right. Do you anticipate that you would be done with your presentation for Monday prior to Monday, so you could send it to us, or sometime? I mean, prior to the meeting, so we will have it.
Yeah, I'll do that. Because it's a hearing. Again, we're not going to make that many modifications, and much of what we're kind of. It's all based upon a spreadsheet, so we have the cells all set. So what we do is we go back in and change the numbers, and everything just changes right on the slideshow. So we'll be able to get that done. Again, what we have to do, I'm going back through and looking at the information that is that was shared from the 11 members so far, and if I get some more, and see how I can tie that back into some of the things that we're looking at in terms of the budget. We're going to define the staffing a little bit more. I hear what you're saying, Malaya, about being able to say, hey, we need this, here's the cost, here's the cost, here's the cost, as well, if that's the case. But I think for the most part, again, as Ken mentioned, I don't think the towns want to hear, hey, so you've lost 300 students, but why are you adding more people here, there, or the other place? I can tell you, this group, the instructional support that has been provided through our tech instructional support people, it's been fantastic. And as we look at a model moving forward around instructional coaches, right now we have no instructional coaches. We have no one that goes into the classroom to support teachers around math, ELA, anything, early literacy. So it's definitely something that's on the back burner a little bit right now, because I'm not sure how it would play out with funds. But literacy is a big piece of what I think people are really concerned about. And as we look at this, I think having true literacy coaches again who can work directly with teachers would really be a benefit ultimately for all of the schools that all the elementary schools right now moving up into the middle schools.
So our next meeting, perhaps we can talk about all the extra money the state's going to give us and how we're going to reduce assessments. And then also maybe we can talk a little bit at our next meeting about summer and how you're planning to budget for whatever student needs might be for remediation, ESY, et cetera.
Yeah, and I'm hoping
compensatory services and such. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I think that's something that we're, the ESSER 2 funds, so that grant that we're currently, applying for, we do have a bucket. There are 3 buckets that we have for that. That's how you have to divide it up. And one of the buckets is extended day services, summer services. 20% of any of that, the 1.9 trillion, if it ever goes through, 20% of those funds that come directly to a school district have to be set aside for remedial summer, tutoring support for students. So that
I hear we're getting 20% of $1.9 trillion. I like that. Well, we can leave it at that. Right? that would solve some problems.
We're going to be all set. Yeah, we're going to be all set. 20% of whatever we get out of the 1.9, which again, it's based upon Title I, so it's probably not going to be a huge amount.
But we have more low-income students than we did last year, so
we do.
I saw that recently. I was surprised, but we do.
Yep.
I like to point out that that's not a good thing in terms of our
it's
towns.
not a good thing,
I know.
But statistically, in this case, no, that is not a good thing. And I unfortunately suspect we will probably have more when this pandemic situation is over and our lunch is no longer free for all. I suspect that number will go up, but it's very unfortunate. I'm not celebrating that. I'm saying funding wise, at least, then it will have an impact.
So unless there's other motions that's discussed for next meeting, I'll take a motion to adjourn with thanks to everyone.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. We'll approve by unanimous consent unless there is an objection. Have a good evening, and we'll see you, some of you, tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Good night, guys.
Bye.
Great.